It is your Friday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Last show of the week, and a good one at that. Bobby Nightengale Jr., new Twins beat writer from the Star Tribune, will join me here in just a few minutes to talk about his journey onto the beat and how he got here and what his style will be as he starts to cover the Twins. Just an interesting backstory for Bobby, the son of a longtime baseball writer, Bob Nightengale, with USA Today right now, and just an interesting guy to get to know. Really looking forward to reading his coverage in the Star Tribune as he gets going here. Right about now, he's kind of had a little chance to catch his breath, chance to get here from Cincinnati where he was covering the Reds. But hope you enjoy the conversation with Bobby, and hope you enjoy reading his coverage and hearing him more on this podcast as the days and weeks and months go on. We'll get to some other Twin stuff here in just a little bit, including an absurd comment that I heard, or read at least, from Thursday's game. Another loss to the Rays, another disappointing offensive output in that game. Their hitting coach, David Popkins, was quoted in that game, and I found it to be a little bit over the top. I've got some comparisons to make there. An interesting quote, too, from Doug Mientkiewicz not that long ago. Former Twins minor league manager, former Twins player, had some thoughts about the development of Byron Buxton. I'll get to some Lynx stuff at the end, too. They're honoring their 25-year anniversary of being in the WNBA with an all Lynx team, 25 best players in Lynx history. A lot of stuff coming up this weekend with that. First, though, what did I miss? Let's talk Vikings for a little bit here. We talked Vikings on the Access Vikings podcast earlier this week, as one would on a podcast named Access Vikings. And at that time, beat writers Andrew Kramer, Ben Gessling, and I were kind of talking about Dalvin Cook in couched terms, kind of waiting to see what was going to happen with him, wondering when they would officially get rid of him. And it just kind of struck me at the time that it was kind of an odd conversation to have about someone who has been such a good player for this team over the past several years, and just kind of how strange football is sometimes when we start talking about players of Dalvin Cook's caliber, being too old or costing too much, things like that. It's just kind of the nature of sports. And now that it's being reported by our Ben Gessling that a trade or a release is going to happen for Dalvin Cook by the end of the week, and boy, we're pretty much right up against the end of the week. This is feeling like it's closer to being official, not official yet, but it sounds like Dalvin Cook, the inevitability that we've pretty much known all offseason, particularly since they re-signed Alexander Mattison, his former backup, at a lower cost. That Dalvin Cook would be gone. That sounds like it's going to be a reality, a confirmed reality here very soon. And it just made me think about his tenure with the Vikings, and just I think there was some disappointment sometimes with the injuries. He came in 2017 as a second-round pick. He was off to a great start, but then was injured, I think, in that fourth game of the season where it really seemed like the year was going to go downhill. They lost, I think, to the Lions in that game. It was not a good loss. They were 2-2 at the time, so he did not get to participate in much of what turned into a charmed 13-3 season. He came back in 2018, played 11 games. He was pretty effective. Injuries just kind of slowed him at various points of his career, but 2019 through 2022, even though he missed, I think, 8 games combined in those 4 years, he was over 1,100 yards each of those 4 seasons. He, was a Pro Bowler each of those 4 seasons. He was more or less a workhorse for this team, even though he did miss some time with injury. He was a very good player for this team, still just 27, about to be 28, and it just feels like in the NFL especially, a league with a definite salary cap, even though sometimes the money gets a little funny, you can kind of move things around, the cap gets a little squishy. In a league like the NFL, where a guy like Dalvin Cook accomplishes so much, some people, I feel like we tend to look so much at cap savings, and oh boy, they could save this much on the cap if they release him, almost $10 million if they get rid of him this year. And we don't look at his accomplishments. We don't look at what a great player he has been for this team and how much he will probably be missed. I know that the transition to Alexander Mattison won't be that won't be that dramatic. I think Alexander Mattison will give them some things that Dalvin Cook didn't. I think Dalvin Cook's certainly a more explosive runner, but let's not forget how good Dalvin Cook is, how good he has been for this team. Unfortunately, his best year was probably 2020 when nobody could go to the games, when he had almost 1,600 yards rushing, 16 touchdowns, more than 100 yards per game. Missed 2 games that season, would have flirted with, not 2,000 yards, but flirted with, 1,800 yards at that pace. And every other year, like I said, he's been right around 1,100, 1,200 yards. Last year had 10 combined rushing and receiving touchdowns, a lot of big plays, a lot of moments where he helped them win. Miami, Buffalo, games like that where he was a key player in this offense. And I understand it. I get it. I think this was an inevitability. It still just strikes me as odd sometimes how we view players as assets instead of, a generation or 2 generations ago where you'd say, oh, man, we're really going to miss Dalvin Cook. I don't feel like people are feeling that right now. I feel like people are ready to move on because they understand the economics of the NFL. They understand the realities of running backs. So just taking a pause for a moment to appreciate Dalvin Cook, everything he accomplished here, if this really is the end, as it seems like it will be, and maybe trying to reframe how I think about these things going forward. Before we get to Bobby Nightengale Jr., a couple things caught my ear and my eye regarding the Twins. Number one, they lost again to Tampa Bay on Thursday. Again, that's Tampa Bay, one of the best teams in baseball right now. They've been red hot, but a sweep there. Twins, lose again. The offense not good. I think 7 runs in their last 6 games. Now that's a tough way to win, including 5 losses in a row. Fall below 500 for the first time this season, still in first place in the American League Central, but that does not mean much to me right now. It's more the quality of play and the quality of at-bats, and that leads me to a quote from David Popkins, the Twins hitting coach. Quote, "It definitely is a frustrating day talking about their game on Thursday. We probably had 5 to 7 more barrels than they did today, and they got the win because they had a little more timely hitting." It's kind of been the story a lot of the year. Folks, I think we finally found the equivalent of a soccer coach lamenting having the run of play but not winning a match, or an NFL coach complaining that they had the time of possession but didn't win the game, or an NHL coach talking about out-chancing somebody. I get it. You'd like to be rewarded when you hit the ball hard, but, hitting the ball hard is not the same as being a consistent offensive team. And this has not been anywhere near a consistent offensive team. And even if you didn't get the breaks one day, the overall breadth of results this season has been really bad. It's been disappointing. That you got a lot of guys struggling right now, a lot of underperformance. You've got too many games where you score 2 or fewer runs. Including, I think now it's 6 in a row. I think that they've been down under that number. So I get it that you would like to be rewarded on an individual day, that you can feel like you didn't get the breaks, that it was frustrating. But let's not isolate on the number of barrels in one game, the number of times you barrel up a baseball and hit it hard in one game compared to the overall body of work. Now, other quote that caught my eye was from Doug Mientkiewicz, and this was from, I think it was a podcast with AJ Pierzynski a week or 2 ago, but I was just seeing it recently. He's criticizing the Twins for how they developed Byron Buxton, and I think this probably goes back beyond the current regime, because, Buxton drafted in 2012, brought up through the system. Mientkiewicz was his manager in the minors for a little while, and he's saying, I'm surprising that Buxton is doing as well as he has, because to me, we developed him in the worst fashion possible. Thankfully, he was just good enough to where his talent finally came out. I don't think that he's put it all together yet, and when he does, it's going to be epic. Now, AJ Pierzynski, also a former Twin, asked for some clarity at that point. He said, the number one thing you always hear in baseball is what? You got to make adjustments. Well, in Byron's case, yeah, you throw him heaters in Class A ball, he's going to kill you. We all knew the slider was his voodoo, was his kryptonite. For example, I put him in the 3-hole one night in A-ball, and they're like, you can't do that. And I'm like, why not? And they're like, we want him to hit leadoff. Mientkiewicz continues, I said, what's his number one problem? Off-speed pitches. You think he's going to see them in the 1-hole? If you put him in the 3-hole and he sees more sliders throughout his career before he gets to the big leagues, he's going to be better in the big leagues because of this. And he's like, well, his numbers will suffer now. And Mienkiewicz's frustration coming through in all this. A lot of this is water under the bridge, second guessing, stuff like that. But I just thought it was interesting that many years after the fact, Doug Mientkiewicz lamenting how Byron Buxton was developed with the Twins. Who knows if that's playing a role with Buxton right now? His biggest issue, of course, is more staying healthy, and he's again on the injured list, even despite their best intentions to keep him healthy by DHing him this year. Getting hit by a pitch the other day has landed him on the injured list. He was having a very inconsistent season before that. He's been much better at the plate when healthy the last few years than at the start of his career, but just interesting quote from Doug Mientkiewicz, not absurd in the same way as the David Popkins quote, but both of those caught my eye as we think about a team struggling mightily offensively.
MGM Wine and Spirits is the choice for savings, service, and a great selection of spirits, pre-mixed cocktails, wines, and of course, ice-cold beers and hard seltzers. With over 30 locations throughout the Twin Cities and beyond, there's an MGM near you. Head to MGMWineandSpirits.com to find a convenient location in your area. Get social. Follow MGM on Facebook and Instagram for all the latest news and trends. Make great moments with MGM Wine and Spirits, your locally owned and operated choice for over 50 years. Save time, save money. Shop MGM.
All right, I am really happy to be joined today by Bobby Nightengale Jr., one of our very newest writers. The Star Tribune sports staff is going to help cover the Twins, one of our two Twins beat writers, along with Phil Miller, who a lot of you are very familiar with from numerous appearances on this podcast and from reading him for many years in the Star Tribune and on StarTribune.com. But I wanted to take today to introduce people who might not know Bobby as well to the audience here and just to Minnesota in general. So, Bobby, good afternoon, good morning. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me. Been a long time since I got the job. A long time listener of this podcast. So
a long time listener since you got the job. I like it. I like it. That's good enough. We'll take it. We obviously we want all the listeners that we've got, and I appreciate you listening, and of course being a guest today. Let's start open-ended a little bit. You came here, you covered the Reds for several years in Cincinnati. How did you get your start? And we'll get into your dad at some point, but just what made you want to be a ball writer, a baseball writer, and how did you kind of get on this path?
Yeah, I mean, my dad was he's probably the one who sparked, at least, I want to work in sports, and kind of paved okay, I can see him doing it. Longtime columnist for USA Today. So kind of being able to watch him, it was like, okay, this is kind of a real path. There was a point where I wanted to be a broadcaster. That's what I went into college for. The end of my college, that's when writing became a little bit more prominent. And then out of college, my first job was an internship with MLB.com covering the Detroit Tigers. In 2013, they ended up losing in the American League Championship Series, but that was kind of first chance to be a true beat writer. I was the backup to their MLB.com writer, Jason Beck. And so that was kind of the first time I was like, okay, baseball, it was always my favorite sport growing up. And then being able to cover it for almost an entire season and a playoff run, it was like, okay, this is kind of what I want to get back to. After that, I covered high school sports for 4 years in Lawrence, Kansas. Also covered some University of Kansas football and basketball. So got to see both sides of the spectrum, a bad football team and a great basketball team. And then spent the last 5 years in Cincinnati. So that was kind of what I wanted to get back to, was getting into Cincinnati. That was my first true year, our lead beat writer for the Cincinnati Enquirer newspaper there. So that was kind of the dream coming true, getting the chance to be on that beat for 5 years. And then this opportunity, a chance to come home, was, one I couldn't pass up. And kind of another dream too, just kind of, I was never, I was born in San Diego. I grew up in Minnesota, in Bloomington. So, but the Twins, I don't know if I'd consider myself like a diehard Twins fan, but the teams that I grew up with, the Torrey Hunter years, Jock Jones, Christian Guzman. I mean, those are the kind of the guys that I grew up watching. And so it's kind of cool to come back and be like, okay, I don't know if I always foresaw myself becoming a Twins writer, but coming back to the organization where it was like, okay, this is the team I remember growing up with.
When your dad has done something for so long, and then you kind of explore kind of your own path, and obviously you don't want to do everything he does, or you don't want to just like say, my dad's in it, and so then I can be in it. Like, how do you kind of separate, obviously, sharing, talking baseball, talking ideas, talking about the industry, the craft, while also kind of charting your own path and being your own writer?
Yeah, I mean, I remember in college it was always a thing where I would never kind of bring it up. Not that I would ever say I wasn't his son, but it was one of those. If someone didn't bring it up beforehand, it wasn't something I mentioned, just because it was kind of one of those. I wanted to carve my own path, kind of do things my own way. Baseball, like I said, was my favorite sport, but also huge college basketball fan. So getting to cover that a few years in Kansas, that was kind of a dream come true in that sense. But it was also, it's hard when it's kind of like you see it every day. I read his stories probably for the last, 99% of his stories for the last, for my lifetime, but probably the last 20 years, 99% of the stories he wrote. When we talk on the phone, a lot of it, centers around what you're writing, baseball, kind of what we're doing. So, I mean, it's one of those, it's kind of, you grow up with it, you're used to it. But it was also one that I tried as much as I could to carve my own path. And, I feel like I've kind of gained experience at every stop, whether it was high school sports, college sports, now working in MLB for the last 6 seasons. So, feel like I have a lot of my own experiences, and then obviously having him as kind of a mentor, someone who I looked up to, and then having the chance to talk to him about stories. So it's kind of like a full circle, really cool family connection there.
No, absolutely. And you said you how long did you live in Minnesota growing up? It sounded like you lived in a few different places, but
yeah, just second grade through all the way through high school, and
okay.
then once I hit college, I was there for one summer, and then I haven't been back probably over a decade now.
And now you're on I think I'm interrupting you right now on a house search, or at least on a place to stay search. I mean, this is, you got hired, you got, you were got to the Star Tribune last week. You're kind of moving all your stuff. You've got you got a family. How hectic is kind of the logistics of this, especially kind of what turned into a mid-year move?
Yeah, I thought, because I had about a month between when I accepted the job and when I started the move to Minnesota with my wife and 1-year-old daughter, and I thought that was going to be enough time to get housing situated. I was pretty kind of lax about it. Like in Cincinnati, we sold our house in one day, so kind of had these grand expectations that everything would be pretty settled pretty quickly. But as I've learned, the Minnesota housing market is not the easiest thing to maneuver. So that's been, I think we're 0 for 5 or 0 for 6 on houses we put offers on so far. So still looking everywhere. There's a lot of places that we're looking that I thought I would never live. So not super desperate now, but the clock's definitely ticking a lot more than it was.
Well, unfortunately, Bobby, 0 for 5 or 0 for 6 could put you right in the middle of the Twins lineup right now. They're struggling, and I know you're not really fully immersed in the beat yet, but I know you've done a few things already. You're kind of getting up to speed and kind of getting ready to fully launch here. Just early impressions of coming to a market where the Twins are obviously at a much different place probably right now than the Reds are in terms of their ability and desire and thinking they can compete for for a division title at the very least this season and maybe beyond. What are your kind of early impressions on what you see with the Twins this year?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, you always come back to pitching in my eyes. I mean, that's talking to guys who signed with the Reds as free agents before this recent rebuild. It was always about guys who are always drawn to pitching. So the starting rotation that they have, I mean, losing Tyler Mahle and losing Maeda and still not missing a beat, to me, that's something that's like, okay, that can carry you a deep postseason run when you have pitching like that. But the offense, it kind of reminds me of a Reds team a few years ago where 2020 Reds, all they could do was hit homers. They couldn't score any other way. And the Twins kind of remind me of that, where they don't rely as much on the homer as the Reds did a few years ago. But they don't really have kind of a diverse offense, especially when Correa's not hitting, when Buxton's kind of been streaky. So it's one of those, I think it's hard for fans to watch. And I understand coming in, it's like you can kind of sense the frustration kind of around the team. But I think when you have a struggling offense, it makes a team so much less fun to watch compared to a team that if they score 5 runs and you get outscored, you can kind of live with that a little bit more. But the Twins, I feel like, are so limited in terms of They don't have a ton of speed. They've stolen a lot more bases in May than they did in April, but not a ton of team speed. They're not the greatest defensive team. It was kind of built to outslug teams, and when they're not outslugging teams, this is what happens where you feel like you're in every game. The pitching's going to keep you there, but definitely they probably, I know their run differential says they've lost a lot more games than where they should be based off kind of how good their pitching's been.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good diagnosis of where they're at so far, and surely plenty more to come as you get further into the beat. You're probably familiar with a lot of guys on this team already because the Twins have made a lot of deals with the Reds in recent years. I mean, obviously now Tyler Mahle, you won't get the chance really to cover him because he's obviously out for the year, and maybe that could be the end of his Twins career. But Sonny Gray was on the Reds. They've made a few different deals with the Reds. What's the scouting report? What do you know about the guys that came over from Cincinnati that are now here that you might be able to interact with again?
Yeah, I was joking with Kyle Farmer after their game last Sunday where he was there was a bunch of reporters outside next to his locker after they lost 2-1 to Cleveland, just to talk about the offensive struggles. And I go, "You're still the same guy. Everyone always shows up at your locker no matter how well you did." And he started laughing, but he was a huge fan favorite. Kyle Farmer was starting shortstop for the Reds. Kind of, they were at a spot where they didn't really have a shortstop. They had guys playing out of position. He went there and did really well. So he was probably the most popular former Reds player that's on the team right now. Sonny Gray, I remember when they traded him, it was a cost-cutting move for the Reds. But also I think he's kind of surpassed expectations in terms of just the success he's had in Minnesota. Been healthy, pitching well, pitching deep into games. That was kind of the one, not issue, but the one question mark in Cincinnati was, can he go more than 5 innings per start? And I think he's proving that this year. Donovan Solano was another former Red, kind of doing the same thing that he did last year with the Reds, where he can hit. Not a ton of power, but just a guy who you can rely on for a good at-bat. And Jose De Leon was another former Red. Didn't have a lot of success in Cincinnati, but a good upbeat personality. He was in the starting rotation for the Reds. Now he's kind of at the bottom of the bullpen for the Twins. But so it's nice coming in midseason, trying to learn a new team, trying to learn familiar faces. At least it's like, okay, at least I remember where some of these guys came from. And same thing when I was leaving Cincinnati, where it was like Spencer Steer, former Twins prospect, Christian Encarnacion Strand, Casey Legumina. So there's some former Twins and the Reds that at least I got to know. And it's like, okay, this is, at least I know the deals kind of in and out from last year.
As you start writing more, obviously, and you'll probably be talking to me quite a bit more too as time goes on. What should people expect from your coverage? How do you describe your kind of beat coverage style?
Yeah, I try to make it where it's a place where all diehard fans can go to, but also a lot of casual fans can find something to read each week. At least multiple stories a week that they're going to find interesting. I'm looking forward to the draft is coming up next month. Twins having a top 5 pick. So fans, I know like most college baseball players, high school baseball players are pretty unknown, but I think when you have a top 5 pick, that changes the equation a little bit. So I'm excited to dive into that. I'm big into prospects, just kind of from Cincinnati where they're rebuilding. That was such a big focus for them. So looking forward to kind of adding that coverage to adding more prospects and just covering the team. I mean, Phil Miller, I've read him for a long time. He's a great beat writer, excellent writer overall, even covering court cases now for Bally Sports Deals.
Right.
So looking forward to complement his coverage and just kind of adding another perspective and, hopefully giving fans another reason to subscribe to the Star Tribune.
Get ready for more emails on Bally Sports North and how to watch the Twins than you ever would have imagined you could ever get. But it's an interesting subject. I mean, I think both of us would agree that, if this changes, and it could change, in the matter of a few weeks, if it changes in the middle of a season, even if it doesn't feel a lot different to a lot of viewers, it's not only a kind of like how you watch the game thing. It's kind of feels like the start of what could be a shift in the economics of baseball and kind of how they're trying to structure the revenue, things like that. This is a pretty big deal that I wouldn't have imagined a couple of years ago.
Absolutely. I mean, you hear Dave St. Peter say they're making over $50 million a season off the TV deal. I mean, that's I don't think MLB would be interested in producing the games if there wasn't a lot of money to be made through this. But you're saying you have to make up $50 million. From a team perspective, for a Twins team that's already committed a lot of payroll to a lot of players, I mean, that has to be like a little extra added pressure saying, okay, this has to work. Fans have to, but I do think, I think the biggest complaint I always heard was the blackouts, MLB TV especially. And if you're able to end that and allow fans that want to watch more opportunities to actually watch games, I think that's a good thing overall. But yeah, you wonder how everything's going to change. Like San Diego's kind of already done it, but you hear like they're not going to do pregame shows for road games. And to me, that just seems so foreign. And you're going to change a lot of the ways people consume baseball. And so I'm interested to see kind of how, like you said, it's kind of like you're on the ground floor of something that's about to change.
A couple more things for you, Bobby. Chatting here with Bobby Nightengale Jr., new beat writer at the Star Tribune covering the Minnesota Twins. I guess the first thing I would ask you is, now that you've been back in Minnesota, like what feels the same? What's different? What's the best thing that you've done so far here?
Yeah, I mean, just getting to see family, that's been probably the biggest thing with a 1-year-old. I hadn't been back in probably a year and a half. So, I mean, that's probably been the best thing. My mom still lives here. Brother and sister still live here. So getting to see them. But I would say through the housing search, just going to different cities, I realize now that I based off a lot of cities based off how I viewed their high school sports teams, when I graduated high school. But going to like Farmington, I can't believe how built up Farmington is. Maple Grove, same thing. I mean, some of the expansion some of these cities have had is crazy, but I just remember being like, okay, Edina, I always hated playing Edina. So in high school sports, so Eden Prairie, same thing. So getting to know the cities differently and kind of more in a more adult way has been kind of eye-opening for me too.
Remind me which high school you went to?
Bloomington Jefferson.
Jefferson. Okay, you were a Jefferson kid. Gotcha. So that was. Were there a lot of prominent athletes? Or was Cole Aldrich? That would have been before your time, I would think, right?
He was a senior when I was a sophomore.
Okay, so that must have been pretty fun. I mean, he went to Kansas too. Although you probably missed him there too because he was probably gone, right?
Yeah, he was gone, but he won a national championship there, so he's back every year and kind of a folk hero there just because he shut down Tyler Hansbrough in the Final Four from North Carolina.
All right. Well, final thing, Bobby, I enjoy having this conversation. I'm sure we're going to do this a lot. You had your own Reds podcast in Cincinnati. Do you enjoy this part of the job? Do you enjoy the talking? Because I know some writers, they do it willingly and they do it well, but they don't always love it. Do you like the podcast format?
I do, just because I feel like there's some things that come across in writing that come off better when you're listening to it in podcast. You can explain things more in depth. You have less constraints where it's like when you're writing a story, how can I fit it all into 700 words? You kind of lose not nuance, but I feel like you can go more in depth in podcast. So I do enjoy this aspect of it, and glad to be on here. Enjoyed all the Twins talk that you've had on the show for the past month, and listening to other podcasts, getting ready to listen to the Twins. Other the Twins, the season that they've been having, it's almost been like every podcast has almost sounded the same, where it's like, okay, they're pitching great, but they're not hitting yet. And so that's been funny kind of hearing all the episodes. We need them to do something different for a while, but I don't know, like that kind of 60 games in, 2 months in, maybe they kind of are what they are, but we'll see. I'm looking forward to talking to you a whole lot more and following your coverage in the Star Tribune and on StarTribune.com. Bobby Nightengale Jr., welcome to the Star Tribune. Thanks for joining Daily Delivery today, and we'll talk soon. Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed getting to know Bobby Nightengale Jr. a little bit better, and I hope you did too. First of many podcast appearances. I am sure he likes this format, like he just said, and I will enjoy talking to him more. And I hope his house search continues to heat up more than the Twins' offense. I'm not sure what will come first: Bobby getting a successful offer on a house, or the Twins scoring more than 2 runs in a game. Let's finish with the cooler. Minnesota Lynx had a game canceled or postponed earlier this week because of the fires and smoke and air quality in New York. That's where their game earlier this week was supposed to be. But the festivities this weekend should trump all of that.
The Lynx are honoring. They're all Lynx team. They're 25 best players. No surprise that the top 5 were ostensibly the 5 players who keyed those 4 championships in the 2010s. Lindsay Whalen, Maya Moore, Rebecca Brunson, Simone Augustus, and Sylvia Fowles. All of those players will be honored in tonight's game and Sunday's game. The festivities kind of tied to both. But, congrats to the Lynx. It's going to kind of cool to see all of those players honored again. Be kind of cool to see some familiar, not too far removed faces, but, definitely a different chapter with this team right now. And so that should be a cool celebration all weekend long at Target Center. That'll do it for me today. Hope you enjoyed everything this week. Go back and listen to past episodes if you missed them. That is certainly allowed under the statutes of podcasts that I know exist. Enjoy a great weekend of weather. Enjoy all of your time. We'll be back at it again with Royce on Monday.